Poland 2017 Part 4 Gdansk, Malbork, Elblag. The train to Gdansk was comfortable and fast, but by the time I reached the main railway station in Gdansk, it was pouring with rain. I took a taxi and soon settled at a flat I had chosen on the internet. Photography is a true wonder. The flat appeared much more attractive on the photos than in its live version, but I didn't allow this to disturb me too much. I had more problems with the fact that the internet was practically on the verge of usable, and I had great difficulties and barely managed to send a note to the owner complaining about the Wi-Fi, so by the late hours of the evening he sorted it out. Meanwhile, I went for a walk around the center of the town, and what was really good about the tiny flat I was staying at was that it was quite close to the old center of Gdansk. I roamed the main streets in the rain for a while, stopping at the tourist info office, and then sat at a restaurant where I had a nice meal and used the significantly better internet connection than the one I had left at the flat. When the rain stopped for a while, I got out to walk a little bit more, as well as to go to the main station where I bought a ticket for the day after, as I wanted to go and visit the Malbork castle, which is situated in a small place of the same name. On my way back from the train station, I went along some side streets, but in the right direction, and there I came across a stunning sight, but as it was still drizzling, I had no desire to get my camera out and fight the umbrella and the bad weather. Still, I gave myself the task to remember where this place was in order to pass there again. Then I got out to the bank of the Motlawa river, and it was really gorgeous there. By the way, Motlawa is a small tributary of the Vistula, which soon enters the Baltic Sea. There were picturesque buildings on the river banks, restaurants, cafes, as well as nice sights all around. I walked upstream for a while, cross onto one of the islands and to the other river bank, and then it started to rain more heavily again. On the other hand, it was already getting late, and I had been up since quite early that morning, so I headed for the flat. The next morning, in addition to the significantly better internet connection in comparison to the day before, I was also greeted by the sun, and it was almost incredible. After all, the forecast had predicted cloudy weather. I headed for the train station, stopping along the way in order to take photos, with a desire to have at least a couple of them with some blue sky. And the photos were truly beautiful. The only problem was that I was not to stay there for too long, lest I should be late for the train. When I got to the station, and it was quite a place, being so beautiful as it is, I had slight problems finding the right platform, but it all eventually worked out, except I almost had a heat stroke, since I had to rush a lot. The problem was not so much the high temperature, but the exceptionally high air humidity, which I'm not quite accustomed to. Once I'd reached the train station in Malbork, it took me some 20 minutes to get to the castle. I found it interesting that along this way I didn't notice any posters or signs that would suggest the direction in which the castle was located, taking into account that this is by far the main attraction of the place. Namely, This is the biggest castle in the world made of bricks and the biggest brick building in Europe. Its construction was started in the 13th century by Teutonic knights. Not only did they start it, but this was where their seat was, as well as the capital of their state that existed for around 2 centuries. Although Malbork, that is Marienburg, used to be the capital for around 150 years. The state of the Teutonic Order used to cover the territories of northern Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and the present-day Kaliningrad, formerly Königsberg, which belongs to Russia. The Teutonic Order was established in connection with the Crusades, and the original name of the order, the Teutonic Order of the Hospital of St. Mary, suggests what its function used to be. These were knights who used to run a hospital. They came from the territory of the present-day Germany, and their patroness was the Holy Virgin. Of course, they went to the Holy Land and fought there, but when this ended, there appeared a problem as to where to settle them. They eventually came here, since they were invited by a Polish noble with an idea and plea that in return for the land and the space they, that is, the knights, tried to convert some local pagans. The knights were led by the Grand Master, and during the existence of this state there were 16 of them in total. A new one would be elected after the death of the previous one, and he would remain as the head of the order and state until his own death. Very important for the history of Malbork, originally called Marienburg, was the Battle of Grunwald, in which Teutonic knights fought with Poles and Lithuanians. Although the knights lost, the castle remained unconquered, but the order started with its own demise, getting over time into a position where they had no funds to pay the mercenaries they needed, and finally selling the castle. After 300 years under Poles, in the 18th century, the castle went into the hands of Prussia and then to Germany. Thus it came that in 1945 Germans and the Red Army battled for it. The Germans were in the castle, and it took the Soviets a few weeks to finally conquer the castle, which by then was all but destroyed. Both the place and the castle went to Poland after World War II. The reconstruction and restoration were completed as late as in 2016. The last to be restored was the St. Mary's Church, extending from the upper castle, which is also the oldest section of the complex. The castle is truly huge, and although not all the paths have been open to visitors yet, it takes a few hours to walk around it. There are several structures, inner yards, passages between walls, dried moats, and many details, but it is also very nice to see the castle from the outside. Around the castle there used to be a pond and several levels of protection, making it more difficult to conquer, and throughout the history it proved that those who envisaged it were quite successful in their designs. In addition to the moats, the drawbridges, and the portcullis, there were also suitable places where any unwanted visitors could have hot water, hot oil, or hot tar poured over them. Around a large inner yard that preceded the upper castle, there are buildings that are called the middle castle. They contain premises for the placement of guests, as well as kitchens, a well, and reception halls. There is also the Grand Master's palace with his private quarters, including even his private toilet. And there are, of course, formal refectories in which the Grand Master ate together with his guests, but it is interesting that there is a summer and a winter refectory. What is the difference? The summer one has a higher ceiling and a high number of large windows, while the winter one, in addition to the lower ceiling and fewer windows, also has opening for floor heating. Namely, fires were fed on the lower floors, the hot air was taken through a pipe system to the floor of the heated room, and there it entered the given room through several gaps in the floor. From the middle castle, one first enters a broad passage that runs around the upper castle, almost like a walking area, and following this passage one can reach St. Anne's Chapel, which is located under the choir of St. Mary's Church. 13 out of the 16 Grand Masters were buried in this chapel, but today only 3 graves may be seen. They are marked by stone grave slabs. Going around the upper castle, you can also get to the Grand Master's rose garden. The upper castle served for the spiritual life of the order members. Its foundations are made of granite, and they are up to 3.5 meters thick, with bricks laid down upon them. When I said that not all the sections were open to visitors, I was primarily thinking of the fact that it was possible to visit only the lower floors of the upper castle. It is probably necessary to take more time and to envisage and prepare the upper floors well. On the other hand, the inner yard and the cloisters running around it, as well as the rooms that can be visited, have some very pretty and interesting parts. For instance, on top of the well, which is in the center of the upper castle's inner yard, there is a statue of a pelican who, according to the legend, feeds its young with its own blood, thus symbolically representing Christ who sacrificed himself for the mankind. Around the inner yard there is a cloister, and from there one may enter different rooms, including the dormitories of the order members, a refectory, a hall for the rest, etc. And from here one can reach St. Mary's Church, which was completely destroyed in 1945. It was here that I finished with my visit to the Malbork castle, and I was exceptionally pleased with it. But even as I was leaving the castle, I kept looking around because there were continuously some nice angles to be admired and enjoyed. Then I went back to the railway station, and from there moved on to the town of Elblag. Namely, it had occurred to me to visit Elblag when I had thought that during my return from Kaliningrad I would have to change the direction of my journey in this place in order to continue to Olsztyn. All this changed when I bought direct coach tickets from Kaliningrad to Olsztyn, but the idea of visiting Elblag remained. On the other hand, although the thorough visit of the castle required a minimum of 3 to 4 hours, I still had some free time, so why not then go to Elblag? It was a kind of a challenge. Namely, the guy who worked at the info center in Gdansk was from Elblag, and he told me that they had started with the renovations of the town center. But he was nonetheless surprised when I said I would like to go there. And so I went there. I walked from the train station to the old center, and it was quite a lot. Plus, it was through a rather uninteresting area. Other than a very nice line of trees, there was nothing else that caught my eye. But when I got to the old town, it could be seen that the facades of some interesting buildings were freshly painted, and there were a few nice sights. Regardless of that modest architectural offer, Elblag is actually a very interesting place to visit, since it is possible to sail along the Elblag Canal there. This is in fact an 80-kilometer long canal which links lakes and waterways in this part of Poland. Today it is mostly used for tourist purposes, but in addition to using locks, the vessels are occasionally transported over dry land using a special system which makes this entire structure very interesting. Still, this requires at least one whole day, which I didn't have, so I just read about it. On the other hand, in the center of the town, I also saw some buildings that are in need of quite a lot of work, but other than these thoughts of mine, it was important that it was starting to rain. As I was finishing my tour of a kind, the rain was becoming more intense, and I decided to sit in a cafe, order something, and ask them to call me a taxi. And I did all of this, but halfway through my coffee, while the taxi was already there, the rain became so heavy that I felt it pointless to continue sitting outside, even under a thick canopy. So I left my coffee and rushed into the taxi. The taxi driver was a very nice man, and he just kept repeating, "Catastrophe, catastrophe." The way I understood him, this kind of weather was not quite normal and usual. I had read that it may get rainy during summer, but this rain flooded entire sections of streets, and the taxi driver occasionally had to drive with no visual input, with a hope that no hole had been made in the street in the meantime, since it was impossible to see the asphalt. Still, he brought me safely to the station, and I could return to Gdansk. There I was met by dry weather, and on my way to from the station through the city center, I could still enjoy in some nice sights which are abundant in Gdansk.